Thank you for the very interesting panel. I want to make an observation first before asking you a question. Well, I mean, LLMs don't reason about themselves, actually. I mean, even thinking traces are a misnomer. They're not thinking. For example, I can inject something in a thinking trace, and the LLM cannot distinguish it from what it generated previously and what its human input or something like that. And also, about large language models, I think what Professor O'Hara said, it's very important. In fact, that it's a simulation of language. It's not language completely. It cannot produce out of distribution. I mean, that's the code. It's not even a point to argue about. It cannot, because it's made like that. And we humans produce language even out of distribution all the time. We came up with all the language out of distribution in the first place. Okay, now moving from this observation, what was discussed first during the panel is about accountability and trustworthiness being a misnomer, right? So, I mean, often when I say an accountable or a trustworthy drone, for example, in terms of a consumer drone, I usually mean reliability rather. So it's something that it's reliable enough not to crash on people while filming a game, a soccer game. Or in the military case, it's reliable enough not to get the target wrong. But, or also explainability is another misnomer, right? It's a marketing term that usually means that it can point at which input produced the output given given in the provision and how much it influenced. So, don't you think a large part of the problem here is about deliberately misleading with these terms to misrepresent and hype up these tools, often for self-enrichment, and then people, technical or not, engineers, philosophers, taking these at face value and then running with them, repeating them dogmatically, and then we end up with terms such as trustworthiness, which doesn't mean anything at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no. So no, I don't believe it's only marketing speech. My feeling is, and I've come just from a workshop that I attended yesterday where someone from the engineering field gave an introduction into LLMs, and there were many STS researchers in the room, and it led to terrible debates, and it was all very unproductive because precisely all the terms that were used were extremely anthropocentric. There was talk about thinking and brain-like and all of that you have. But unfortunately, I believe it's not only, it may be to some extent intentional to foster the hype and to buy into these systems, but especially also engineers, computer geeks, have a tendency to use these terms because they think it's cool, and it's also, it gives you a quick idea about what this is. So I don't think it's evil spirit or evil-minded. It's just unfortunately this is the way we approach these systems and have come to talk about them. Although we know in the meantime we shouldn't do that. It would be much of the discussions and confusions we wouldn't have if we would always call about, a probability distribution. It's just not a very consumer-friendly way of speaking about it. Yeah? But it would alleviate us from many issues. I fully agree.
For the sake of time, do you mind if we move to the next question? Yeah?
Good morning, thank you a lot. I have a question because about first panel and second, I think there is a connection. IA, or human enchantment with Neuralink and other stuff for real, are designed and talk for more transhumanist, for be more human in thinking and body. I say this because I work in formation for adult, okay? And we are talking about AI. If you read the presentation about IA, there are no problem, only opportunities. Like you say first ago, there is a beautiful, wonderful world where, like you, Dr. Professor O'Hara, the people don't have the problem of thinking, study, and embrace for be more smart, etc. Study. There are only simple solution. This is, I think, the big brick in the big problem, because for the people, normal people, IA, transhumanists, and Neuralink are only opportunity, are only a fantasy world where there are no, in Catholic think, no limit for the human. I think this is the big problem. Are you agree that the conversation, the presentation about AI for the media, normally for the politici, there are no problem. It's an opportunity, a beautiful opportunity. Are you agree about this?
So the question seems to be about techno-fixes, technological determinism, particularly the way it's diffused in mass media, online, and that it's often framed, although we obviously both utopian and also the kind of dystopian, techno-pessimistic narratives also online, but his concerns seem to be about the fact that often when these technologies are promoted or spoken about, that they're spoken about as you can't kill progress, so that falls within the techno-deterministic narrative, right? Which often falls, obviously, within the convenience of the innovators who would have to gain from the technologies.
Well, I agree, you can't kill progress if there is progress. I picked up another element in your question is about people being, in a certain way, we lose our own ability to think because AI is doing the thinking for us, is that right? And I think in that sense we can see the positive reaction to AI in a sense that we didn't foresee for coming. Besides, because we are human, we have an ability to reflect and say, well, is this true? I don't believe this. There's something not right here. But we can also have an education system. There's a book published in the United States many years ago by Alan Bloom called, what was it, Killing the American Mind? Or Closing the American Mind. And essentially, you can produce a system of education where essential questions are no longer asked. So the best way to produce a society which are your 1984 or whatever is stop asking essential questions. And in fact, there's a famous it was German-American philosopher died in 1984 who did the study of Gnosticism or ideologies. And he says, in all ideologies characterized by one big thing, the prohibition of question. If you want an ideology to go forward, make sure you build into your axiom certain questions you don't ask. And he looks at Marx, he looks at Mein Kampf, he looks at positivism, the English Revolution, Leviathan, and you can see it across the board. Train people not to ask certain questions. So that way you kill their humanity. You can never really, but it comes out then psychologically in serious problems. But in certain sense I agree. But the nice thing, the advantage is almost because AI can do so much for us, especially writing articles or whatever, you begin to see, is this really creative or not? We begin to pick up the true creativity when you see it goes beyond the AI. Because AI will do almost write the thesis for your students, lay out the theme of how it should be structured, And of course, that's a big challenge with people in academia, how much you're going to accept or what do we accept. But it's always wonderful to find that jewel where you know it's creativity. You see something totally different. This is not AI. And that's where the human condition breaks through. And so I can only pray that that happens more and more.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, I think even that AI can help us to see what only humans can do. But then we should not underestimate AI and say, okay, it's just language, no matter how verbose AI is, and frequently it's just repetitive verbosity when you look deeper into it, but it already has the capacity to learn. It doesn't mean that it has a consciousness, but it learns in one way or another, be it by probabilities, language models, and so on. And it can make judgments, formulate judgments, at least, about its own functioning. And in that sense, I meant thinking its own thought, not in the sense that it has anything like the human consciousness, in the way that human reflects on his thoughts, but it does learn. And that follows from the fact that it formulates statements about its own functioning, so about its own thinking, or thinking in quotation marks.
Well, it has schemes of occurrence. It means has schemes of occurrence and loops, or it's in loops. That I agree. It's in any program.
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, the problem is our language.
No, just for the sake of time, I asked the remaining people who have questions to direct your question to a single speaker so that I can respect everyone's time. Thank you, Cody.
Okay, I guess Eric, I'm not sure who's the best equipped. I just want to briefly put on the table two distinctions, share my intuitions, and then get your reaction. And feel free to just react to one of the distinctions. I wonder if you think there's a relevant distinction between moral and epistemic trust, right? Epistemic trust being you trust something to give you information, to inform your knowledge. Moral trust being you trust a system or an entity to act well or to care about you. My intuition regarding that distinction is that reliability might be sufficient for epistemic trust, but something more robust might be necessary for moral trust. The other distinction is a distinction between two levels of opacity and its relationship to trust. The kind of intrinsic opacity of neural networks and the fact that even the machine learning engineers can't really quite understand their outputs, and the intentional opacity of the technology companies that make these things that will hide their algorithms often for intellectual property reasons. My intuition there is that the intentional opacity is more of a barrier for trust, right? If there's more of a barrier for trust, right? So like there might be someone, a human that I'm talking to, and I don't understand the what's going on in their brain or the learning process that they went through their educational journey. And that might not inhibit my ability to trust them, but if they start intentionally concealing relevant information from me, then I'm going to be more suspicious.
Thanks for the two easy questions. The second one is easier to answer. I do agree with you. I believe, I would agree intuitively that, of course, obviously things become really problematic where something's hidden from you. So I think that's clear. But the conceptual opaqueness is also very fundamental. So I also agree with you that especially neural networks, and even more so in recurrent neural networks, it's not only that things are conceptually opaque, it may actually be that to some degree their success lies in this very fact, because they are not, this is why they are so much better than what we could do with expert systems, because expert systems always used to be sort of constrained by our previously preformed concepts. So, so there is this apparently inherent duality between explicability and precision to some extent, and one may come at the price of the other. Fundamentally at the bottom, which also has mathematical reasons. One is in analysis, and the other thing is algebra, which are worlds apart, and we don't talk much about this. Yeah? So in that sense, I agree with the second one. The first duality I also find very interesting. I find this the epistemic one. Yes, I would agree. But then also think about trust. Let me take an extreme example: trust in God. Trust in God is completely unconditional. I don't have a proof, I have nothing, and you may still trust because you believe. So just to say that it's more complicated than what you're suggesting, because that is both. That's moral and epistemic. I know nothing really other than what I believe. So it's philosophically, I'm afraid, even more troublesome than what you suggest. But it's very, very interesting points. Thanks.
Thank you, Cody.
So the recent history of artificial intelligence has been full of big surprises, both for people inside the field like me, who find that stuff we literally taught our students in the 90s stopped being true in the 2010s. We suddenly discovered that capacities that were not intended and were significantly beyond what had been expected. Discovering that large language models were capable of not just generating language, but actually doing various forms of reasoning of various kinds was a surprise. That was not intended. And similarly, predictions about what AI cannot do have a very bad track record, historically speaking. And I think that suggests to me an interesting issue here. We should probably expect this trend to continue. I think we're going to find quite a lot of our assumptions about what AI cannot possibly do to be wrong. We don't know which of these statements are going to be wrong or when, but it's likely that that happens. And that, of course, leads to a question about safety and reliability. In many cases, the reliability is perhaps secondary to the safety. If AI gains a new capability we had not intended, how can we guarantee the safety of that? So it seems to me that the really interesting challenge here is that we have this profound unknowability where a technology is going, given that we actually don't understand the fundamentals, yet make these artifacts that are generating what I would say is truly novel things. This week, one of Erdős conjectures was proven, and mathematicians in the field close to this problem were astonished, because it turns out that the AI solved it in a way no mathematician had actually tried. It did something out of distribution about a problem of some scientific importance, and everybody expects this to continue for the rest of the year. So that is kind of my question. How do we handle the open-endedness here?
Are you addressing to who?
Yeah.
Maybe everyone, this would be our last.
Yeah, maybe that's a quick.
Well, I thank you for these wonderful additions. That follows from the points at least I tried to make. So I wouldn't have anything to add to that. Although, yeah.
Erich?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a lot of interesting points there, and you're asking important questions. I was thinking, did I ever tell my students in the 90s something that was wrong? I don't think so, but it is true. I did not believe something like the LLMs could have happened only 5 years ago. Maybe if you had asked me, I would say, no, that's impossible. So you can be wrong about things. On the other hand, let's be careful with technological determinism. Technology is not a destiny. We can shape it and we can move it in directions that we would like it to go. There are certain technologies where we have decided, let's probably not do that, at least to some extent. Let's limit our investigations into chemical weapons and certain other things. So we can shape it. We can also we can inform this debate in ways that it goes. That's one thing. The second thing is, what you're asking about human nature is very interesting. So obviously the history of AI can also be taken as a history of misinterpreting what humans, how we should look at ourselves. So in the early days, it was things like, I don't know, mathematics that would define intelligence. Then we thought, oh no, it's chess playing. And one piece after another, all of this got eaten by computers, and they can do all these things. And now they can speak wonderfully and write poems which are, well, mediocre, but to some extent sometimes they are surprising. So perhaps it's not a good idea to define us as humans as that can be achieved by a machine. And I derive from what you're saying not a technological program, but perhaps a human program of thinking about ourselves differently. So maybe it's worth thinking about the things we cannot do, the things that we are that we have a limited time span, that we are vulnerable beings depending on others. Maybe we should nurture that more than those things where we are probably going to lose out.
Paul, any last thoughts?
I agree. I would never expected the LEM models to have probably been so sophisticated and expand so quickly. But I would distinguish between a horizontal expansion and a vertical expansion. I think the level, once you're in the context of mathematics and algorithms, the solutions will always be a mathematical algorithmic solution. As I mentioned earlier, the simulate's not the same as being. So the marvel to me is that I'm not a linguist, I hadn't reflected on the question, but it's clear at this stage a lot of things to do with language can be correlated into binary code. Very interesting, because otherwise the robot couldn't function. So I would change the question around. First of all, again, marveled at the programmers who've done it. And secondly, it just shows you that even in human language, there are certain correlations connected with binary code. Nevertheless, it doesn't kill off the creativity of the human being to write a poem, to put together words that you don't expect, right? So I would distinguish always this creative act that's distinct from a horizontal expansion. Moreover, if a mathematician discovered, he gave me a new proof, it's the mathematician found the proof. So, this is a new proof. The computer didn't say this is a new proof. Oh, look, it's a new proof. And you recognize there's a new proof. So we give the confirmation of the authenticity of the computer code. The computer doesn't give it of itself. Again, it's back to Gödel's theorem, which always explains the higher question. How can I affirm a Gödel's theorem as being true, knowing that mathematics cannot confirm its own self? So there's something in us that is more, right?
Thank you, Paul.
I would add very, very shortly, very briefly, that every technology throughout history is accompanied both by enthusiasm and by resentment. So everything that recently, a year or so ago, I've seen a folder, believe it or not, in a country that has been at that time and still is considered as very liberal, about why artificial insemination is something that's dangerous, that has no future, and so it's the 1970s or 1980s. An abundance of nonsense. And then when I remember, I don't remember it from the 19th century, but what I read about it, some arguments against the train were that it is blasphemous to develop something that can be faster than the human. And we have trains now. Artificial insemination happens. Not to speak about more recent development. Obviously, AI is following that. Of course, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't think about it and should trust it. We come to the issue of trust again, and the point that trust is not only performance, but much more than that. And that is how we come back to where we started.
Actually, just one comment there. The game Go, which I don't know anything about, but in Asia, any of the Asians here might know, apparently the world champion was a Korean, and about 5 or 6 years ago, they put up against AI. He resigned after the first move or two. Seriously. It wasn't even like a game of chess where Kasparov went on for a while and then decided to resign. He resigned in the first move. The first move done by the computer was so unexpected, he didn't know how to reply. Very interesting. The first move.
Thank you to our speakers. So I think that, just to close up, I think that we perhaps agree on vocabulary. We're using the terms like accountability, responsibility, trust, but I guess the real work is in choosing priorities and implementing tools and owning our trade-offs. So I'd like to thank our speakers, thank the question. We're going to be moving on to our lunch break. We'll